Hi, this is James Gardner at the CineTechGeek, and it's been a long time since I've done a video for my channel, and well, I've been very busy. You know, the cinema industry is in a bit of a sorry state at the moment, but I wanted to make a vlog to cover a question that a viewer asked me, and I also wanted to show you a little bit what I get up to these days. This is actually my cubicle. This is where I work. I've got a number of workstations around me that I use on pretty much on a daily basis. Here I've got a support station. It's a Linux based station which I love to do my support on. I love Linux. It's really good for doing that, command line, etc. Web browsers and other tools. Behind me, I spend most of my time software development these days. Usually supporting the cinemas, running the cinemas from here, doing software development from here, and it's a laptop so I can actually go anywhere and run the cinemas, because all my tools that I've written for my cinema are all web based, so I can pretty much go anywhere in the world and still run the cinema. And here, this is a Resolve / authoring solution, which I use when people do use me for DCP authoring occasionally. I still keep my foot wet in there because I do some software development around DCP authoring and QC, etc. So I keep my foot wet, or my feet wet, by still being part of the industry as well. So the question that I was asked was, someone said, how do I get into supporting digital cinema projectors? That's a difficult question. It's a very small field. You've got to understand that there's only 200,000 projectors in the whole world, and you know, there's not that many service agents needed to support those projectors. As the projectors have gotten more reliable, they self-monitor themselves, etc. Getting into supporting projectors has been more marginalised to fewer but more capable and trained staff who can go to where they're required at a particular basis, and they're less being called, you know, less visiting on a regular basis, and it's more proactive based on what's going on in the field, rather than going there every 6 months to check everything. Because back in the cogs and wheels days, as I like to call them, it was a very different industry and it was a very different skill base. But so if you wanted to really get into this field, there are a number of approaches you can go. Obviously, the manufacturers, Barco, NEC and Christie, they've got their head offices in different parts of the world, and you could try and see if you can get some interest in going into those areas. There are agents that support cinemas in the world, but as I said before, they're, like, for example, the whole of Australia probably has a couple of, you know, less 10 probably, or less people who take care of the whole of Australia, and typically there's only 1, 2 or 3 key support agents which know how everything works, because that's all they really need, because everything's monitored from a central location. So there's one person monitoring a whole chain or whole, you know, from one sort of location, because that sort of thing's capable now. So they're more like you know, field engineers keeping the equipment running. Now, if you do want to get into more installation, etc., you do need to get into the installation agents, and you've got to remember, there's not, like I said, there's only sort of a handful of people around the world in our country that do it, because there's not that many projectors being installed per year, and there's not that many faults per year, because the stuff is actually quite reliable and looks after itself. And secondly, as the projectors have evolved, they're becoming more modular, so the agents or the field engineers need to know less, because they basically come in with a spare part, bang, bag-a-boom, they put the new one in, take the old one out, and the old one goes back to be refurbished, where they've got trade engineers with exactly the right equipment to make sure that stuff is dealt with properly. Because to tell you the truth, getting into the more sophisticated level of, if you've got a problem with a light engine, you're probably best to actually take that off-site to a clean space, etc., if it needs to be adjusted there. But otherwise, doing your good old installations and convergence and the other things to set up a cinema and making sure the projector works, that's still, it's a bit of a, you have to be lucky, right place at the right time to land in a job like that. Other ways of doing it is, I actually know quite, you know, a lot of cinema chains actually have their own staff to do all this, if they're a big enough chain. And also, I've even seen some small, even independent cinema owners who are bothered to go and get the training themselves. It's actually quite expensive, and you really need to be doing it on a regular basis to be right on top of doing the right thing. And all the, you know, it can be quite complicated, because a digital cinema projector has a lot of moving parts, and understanding how they all interact with each other is not something you can just pick up every 6 months. So yeah, so those are the angles I would say to getting into doing that sort of work, but there is other bits I want to talk about it too. So as an engineer in the field, if you're doing installations or support, etc., you're doing a lot of other things. You know, maybe if you're working for the manufacturer, you're more focused on the projectors and making sure they work. But if you're an engineer working for a big chain or servicing independents, for example, they've got a lot of issues. They've got sound processes, you know, the sightings, you know, designing of the cinema, making sure that the light and the light restrictions, and making sure people have safe areas for the projector light coming out. There's lots of other technical things you have to do as well. Supporting the projector is only a very small part of that. There's point of sale systems, TMS systems, library management systems, the networking that it all puts together, the VPN configurations to make sure you can monitor it remotely. There's lots of moving parts, and being just supporting the projector is just one small part of that. Now, so the industry is changing quite a lot as well, because a lot of the systems are becoming more IT centric. So projectors and cinema players at the end of the day are nothing but computers, but a specialized type of computer. So you really need to be on top of your computer skills. And this is one of the reasons why the industry is actually having a problem with getting or retaining staff in this field going forward, is because if you have that sort of skill base, realistically you can get paid a lot better going to a Google or a plethora of these massive technical companies out there who pay a lot for that sort of skill base. Because of that, you actually see a lot of in smaller parts. For example, in Australia, we mainly have support entities which are owned by the larger cinema chains. And that's not uncommon for large cinema chains to have their own support entities and agents and train them up themselves, because they really need them at any price. And so that's what they do. And so, yeah, that's another thing. You could potentially work for a big cinema chain and, you know, work your way up into supporting the projectors and what's going on there, and getting to know them that way, and get your feet wet via that avenue. But yes, to tell you the truth, you know, I think there are, you know, if you really wanted to get your own projectors, having your own cinema and doing it yourself is probably one of the other aspects. But if you're not putting your hand inside a projector on a regular basis, it's probably not a good idea. You need to be doing it on a regular basis to make sure you're on top of the complexities of dealing with these projectors. They're quite a delicate device, and unless you're doing it on a regular basis, for example, I don't really do it anymore because I'm more involved now in running my own cinemas and running the software to help run them more cost effectively for me, so I can, you know, be more competitive in the market and make more money from a lower population base, and get cinemas into more regional locations. That's been my focus in recent years, to try and expand the cinema experience into regions that it was not capable of being in any longer, due to the dynamics in the business models of running cinemas. So that's what I've been up to. Now, finally, I wanted to actually go into a story as to, you know, how this industry can be quite problematic, and it'll give you an understanding of the dynamics of trying to be a support engineer and what sort of things can go wrong. So my history is that I actually started or was part of a large installation entity in Australia, and we were doing the VPF, etc., and a large company came along and did something which caused a federal court case to happen, and that sort of derailed the company. Now, the company I was involved with was totally found in the right. We were doing the right thing by everyone in the large, big corporate company. Was called by the courts as red-blooded fraudsters, and they planned and carried out a plan to try and steal the opportunity, which was the VPF. Like, I'm not sure why. It's not a terribly huge opportunity, but they did that, and at the very end, the court case happened, and they told the court they were going to administration, and it all fell in a heap in that support entity unfortunately wasn't able to survive that sort of damage via that, that behaviour. So in the long run, however, this has led to an unfortunate future for Australian industry, because it was hoped that an independent support entity could arise from the VPF entity that was supporting the independents. Unfortunately, it was fell back onto not such a good job of achieving that, and utilising a lot of the old, what I call cogs and wheels support agents, and no one's really coming up to supplant them or to replace them, because the costs, like I said, it's not a very, it's very hard to find people who want to take on that sort of role, because if they've got the skill base, they can get more money somewhere else than what the market will bear. And so in the end, unfortunately, Australia's ended up having to rely on, as the independent market, independent cinema owners, on their major competitors to get their support. Now they're not really happy with that, and it was a very unfortunate outcome from this bad behaviour. But it shows you that how important it is to have good support people, and how difficult it is to maintain them and to keep a commercial entity involved in specific restricted markets like Australia. In America, for example, going over there, they've got some large entities. They've got such a large market, they can sustain reasonably sized independent service entities. But unfortunately, in Australia and other parts of the world, usually it ends up being the largest cinema chain who has to have a support entity, which ends up owning the market, because no one can really compete with such a limited demand and that capability. So those are the sort of things that you need to be aware of. And just to follow on from that story, so we had a number of staff that I was training to do the support, and I chose those staff and we trained them up, and they were very competent staff. When this entity that I was in charge with, unfortunately, was unable to move forward due to the court and the poor behaviour from these other entities, those staff did go to other entities, but they didn't really last long, because they were highly trained and very clever staff. And realistically, a lot of the support entities, especially in a limited market, they tend to keep the staff on a needs-to-know basis, and they prefer to go through the they train them how to fix a particular projector with a particular problem with a particular thing. So if this happens, just replace it, don't fix it. Because to know how to fix it, I would have to train them a lot more, and that would cost me money. And also, if they knew how to fix it, they could probably fix it cheaper, which negates the cost of running the entity. So it's a complicated business sort of model, but at the end of the day, it's not within the interest of these larger entities to have service engineers who know what they're doing too much, because it's more profitable not to. Okay, I know it's, so that's one of the reasons why it can be a pretty difficult career to get into. The staff that I had, they didn't last very long in the industry. They got very frustrated because they knew how to fix things, weren't allowed to do so, and eventually they just moved on because they had good skills in IT and technical ability. Obviously, they were sucked up by general other large IT-centric companies very easily. So these are the sort of dynamics you need to know if you want to become a support engineer, and you've got a career ahead of you and you've got to plan out what you're going to do. Just, if you just want to play with digital cinema projectors, you can open a nice cinema in a nice location somewhere, and you own the equipment. You can play with it all you want. You can get all the training. You can pay Barco and NEC. They'll train you if you pay them to train you, and certify you to do certain things with the projector. But that's about the best advice I could give you if you want to stick your head in a digital cinema projector as an authorised engineer. Those are the avenues you have for doing so. Anyway, that's James Garden, CineTechGeek. I hope you have found this vlog informative, and I hope to do some other ones again soon, but I've just been very busy writing a bit of software to help the industry, and also doing a lot of analysis of the industry to better try and inform the local industry in Australia how to navigate the changing of our industry in terms of the dynamics of windows and capabilities. So bye for now, catch you later.